So I figured there was something going on in my head that was stopping me. And eventually I realized that the emotional clutter we have that sort of keeps us hung up on lots of things is probably much bigger than the possessional clutter. And that's why I decided to write my book, Clear the Space, Feel the Rush, because I wanted to cover not only the stuff clutter, the possessions, but the physical body, even sometimes that gets in your way as well. And then the emotional clutter, which I think is probably the biggest.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. It's Audley Stevenson back for another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. You've got it locked to the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to follow us on our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the handle The Audacious Pod. Or if you're watching this particular episode on our YouTube channel, then you know you can tap that bell down below, ding, 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 and stay connected to all great things Audacious related. Now, for many, spring is a time of year that's dedicated to decluttering all the old stuff that you no longer need that's been taking up space. However, there are many, including today's guest, who agree that the decluttering process should happen much more frequently. Connie Ellefson is an author and a professional organizer who helps people release the incredible amount of creativity and energy inside them simply by helping them clear unnecessary clutter. Whether it's physical, mental, or professional, clutter takes up valuable space in their lives, and we can certainly use that space for more productive, creative, and fun things. So now that we're all set, it's time for you to hear directly from Connie herself, and she's up next on the Audacious Living Podcast. Hey, Connie, thank you for joining me today here on the Audacious Living Podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Great. Thanks so much, Audley.
This is good. We have a lot of conversations on this podcast about living our bold, best, audacious lives, and oftentimes what's forgotten about is there's some organization that we need in our lives, some decluttering, if you will, that helps make our lives easier, help us live this life that we want to live. And so, as a professional organizer, I think this makes perfect sense, and there's a great connection here. And I'd love to maybe start off just by maybe talking about the work that you do with people and helping them sort of declutter their lives.
Well, I realized a long time ago, I'm an organizing book junkie, I have to admit. I love to read organizing books, but I found myself going through the process of each new book. I was all excited, this is going to change my life, it's going to make it perfect. And then I'd get about 90% done with the decluttering and organizing, and then I'd stop. I would never finish it. So I figured there was something going on in my head that was stopping me. And eventually I realized that the emotional clutter we have that sort of keeps us hung up on lots of things is probably much bigger than the possessional clutter. And that's why I decided to write my book, Clear the Space, Feel the Rush, because I wanted to cover not only the stuff clutter, the possessions, but the physical body, even sometimes that gets in your way as well. And then the emotional clutter, which I think is probably the biggest. But I ask people when I work with them, I ask them to tell me what their dream is for how they spend their time, and how they spend their time in their homes or offices too. So I try to focus on something that they're moving towards rather than just moving away from something.
Got you. Give me an example when you say emotional clutter. Give me an example what that would be.
It could be something like you have a deep-seated fear of finishing something because that feels like the end. Wow. Or you might be having a little passive-aggressive towards somebody else in your house that won't go along with your program of like, I'd like it to be super decluttered, but my mate doesn't want to help with that, or my kids don't want to cooperate or whatever. So you could be getting in your own way or somehow, or you might be just like, oh, they won't do it, so I better shrink into myself, or, there's a million different ways. And sometimes it may have to do with you're either rebelling against or doing exactly the same thing as what happened in your household as you grew up.
Gotcha.
Like I had a friend whose walls were covered, like you couldn't see barely a square inch of space in the walls with artwork and different items, decorative things. And she said,
Right.
"Oh, it feels like home," and because that's the way she had grown up, with
Yep.
lots of decorative items around. And then somebody else that might be trying to live with her they grew up in a very minimal household, so for them it would feel painful. So
Gotcha.
there's lots of arrangements that have to be made between the people that you live with. So that's
Understood.
always interesting.
It would seem to me that, and some of the examples you gave, the emotional clutter that people are living with inside of them, they can easily be, and I guess depending on how long you had them, kind of just how you operate your way of life. Like, and you could be very unknowingly being held back by these things that are there that you don't even know about.
Right, exactly. A lot of us, we kind of get stuck at the 7 or 8 year old age range in
Okay.
our minds. And before we're that age, we take everything in and we don't really question it. We just say, well, my parents must know what they're talking about. They're the gods, they know. So whatever they say, that I accept that. And then at the same time, you're trying to develop a self-esteem. And so for some of us, maybe not in every area of our lives, but some areas we may just still be stuck in the 7 or 8 year old mind frame, and emotional outlook on certain things.
And where that gets dangerous again, as I said, that just becomes your way of life. Like you're like, we all have these habits or things that we do that are just subconscious. We don't think about. We don't have to put any thought to it. We just operate, and that's what it is. And so you have these habits or behaviors that are formed at the age 7, 8 years old, and then all of a sudden they just become the way of our way we live our lives.
Right. And we don't often stop and ask ourselves, like, I do know I'm an adult now. I do have a better way to approach this, a better way to handle it. I don't have to still be stuck in the 7-year-old fearful mind frame or whatever. So it's always a journey.
And it's a really good point when we talk about fears, because you could very well have this thing that's been holding you back. So I've always been afraid to do X, and because of that, you don't do X, and therefore you don't see what Y and Z afterward, and you just live with it, and you don't do it. Like, as a kid, I remember, I didn't learn how to ride a bike as a kid. So my whole adult life, I'm like, oh, I just don't ride a bike. And I never thought, well, why don't you ride a bike? I just didn't do it until one day I said, yeah, why don't I ride a bike? And I got on and started riding a bike. But the whole idea is these things are subconscious in our head and we don't think about them. We just accept them and they follow us for the rest of our lives. We let them.
Well, my number one declutter tip for all 3 of the areas that I talk about in my book is, first, declutter the guilts and accept the fact that you have these whatever limiting ideas they are. Another big thing to accept is we can't do everything.
Okay.
We might have been told we can do whatever we want, but we can't. We're going to run out of energy before we run out of all the projects our mind can come up with and all the wonderful things you can do in the world that mom and your gut, everybody's going to say that's a good thing to do, but you can't do all of them because your body is finite. It can do a lot more than you think it can, but basically let yourself off the hook, and just figure out what you really want to focus on, and then work backwards from there to what's stopping you right now. Gotcha. I guess it's a good way to do it.
You said there's 3 areas and you talk about, if you can just
I talk about the physical body clutter.
Okay.
Which you can feel sluggish because you haven't been eating very well. Sure. And your body kind of needs to detoxify itself, and it does some of that with food. There's lots of ways we detoxify ourselves, but food is one of the main ways.
Mhm.
Exercise is the biggest way. So I can go into that a little bit more too, but
Mhm.
then there's all our possessions and then our emotional clutter. So my book has 3 big sections to cover each of those 3 areas. And you can start wherever you want because it's set up, each one is independent. They don't have to be
Right.
one after the other. And then
Right.
there's an intro and a final thing. And both of those have stuff in them that's good, interesting information that could change your life. Even if you didn't read the 3
Mhm.
middle sections, if you're saying like, I'm already decluttered. What do I don't need this. So
Gotcha.
anyway, it was pretty exciting and it kind of changed right at the end of my writing the book. So I even changed the subtitle a little bit to reflect that, talking about all the energy that is released when we declutter.
Got you. Got you. The work that you do as a professional organizer, how did you land on that? Is that something you fell into or something you knew you wanted to do?
Well, I'm a civil engineer by profession, and
Okay.
the stuff that I do, it kind of goes up and down with the building market, basically,
Okay.
houses and so forth. So in 2008, I had my 4th layoff in 6 years
Right.
from markets that just kind of collapsed, went up and down. So I thought, might be time for a new career. And I realized that I enjoyed tidying up my desk a lot more than I enjoyed the work. So I thought,
Okay.
I'll try professional organizing. And
That's
I grew up moving every 6 months to a year because of my dad's work. He worked for an oil company, and that was just the part that we did required moving. So we
right.
learned to travel light. And then as I got older and had my own family, then I started accumulating possessions. And at one point we moved house, and it took me and 5 big guys 4.5 hours to move everything from our house into
Wow.
the giant moving van. And I had
Yes.
left college 5 years earlier with everything I owned in my car.
Right.
So I'm like, what happened?
So that's a good question. How does it? I mean, you asked what happened, but how does that happen?
It's a combination of many things, and for each person it's different, but
Mhm.
we do have to maybe give a little bit of, I don't know if you call it blame, because everybody picks their own path anyway, but
Mhm.
all of the things that we are able to buy in the US and probably in Canada as well, that are made inexpensively overseas, it's almost irresistible to say, oh, it's so inexpensive. I'll just,
Mhm.
nope, no hardship. I'll go ahead and buy that. So we accumulate stuff. And of course, we all have gifts from holidays and birthdays that we're not going to stop accumulating. And we just like to, every once in a while, we like to shop. It's part of our human nature. We like to acquire things,
Right.
make us feel more powerful. So it takes some real retraining to say, no, actually not acquiring things is more powerful. But
Right.
yeah, so we all have to work our way through that as well. But it's really easy. A while back when I was finishing up my book, I went to another town, like 2 states away, so I could just focus on the book and not anything else. I work at
Yeah.
home. So, uh,
Yep.
and I was staying in a nice little Airbnb, and I had my computer, my book bag, my clothes were all put away in the closets they provided. But it
Yep.
still took me every night, it would take me 10 minutes to just clean up those few items, get things back in the book bag, computer put away. And I'm like, man, no wonder it takes so much time at home, because we got thousands and thousands more items than I just had on that trip. So
Right.
it's kind of a maintenance thing that people don't realize. It does take time to keep things put away, picked up and put away. Obviously, the less things you have
Yes.
compared to the amount of space you have, the easier it gets. So that's why decluttering is so much fun.
And how often should people be decluttering?
I think that,
Or is there
well,
prescribed free? Is there a prescribed
no,
time frame?
no, it's different for each person, but I would say maybe every 6 months to a year, you might try to get around to each of the areas of your home. You don't have to do it all at once, but like I have to tell a funny story on
Mhm.
myself. I have this hall closet that it doesn't hold much linens. It holds other things that I don't
Okay.
have room for in other places that's handy. So I
Okay.
was finishing my book and I'm still working, and I actually do more engineering than organizing right now because my engineering just started accelerating after that slow period in 2008. It got more. So anyway, I'm doing all these things and I just can't work on this closet. It has deteriorated. I put something away and I didn't put it back in the right place and I was in a hurry. So now it's just this big jumble. And finally, after I finished the book, I said, I am going to treat myself. I'm going to fix up that closet again.
Yeah.
And for a year, I had not said, I have time to do this. I wouldn't let myself do it. I'm like, I need to keep focusing on finishing the book and blah, blah, blah. So I did it one night and it took me an hour and 22 minutes. And I said, do you know how many times in the last year I've watched a movie that was longer than that? And I didn't do the closet because I thought it was just going to take way, way longer. And it didn't. So
that's it. No, and I can so relate as you tell that story because I'm sure many of us have been in that exact same boat where it's like, there's this task, it's got to get done. It just looks too big, too insurmountable. I'll put it off till later when I have more time, not realizing that we always had the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And as far as emotionally decluttering ourselves, again, I know it's going to be different for every individual, but what are some good ways or maybe ways we can check in with ourselves to make sure that we're not carrying more than we need to?
It's one of the best tips that I came across, again, near the end of writing this book, and I put it in there, but it's the number one thing that I tell people, is a thing called the 10-minute do nothing meditation.
Okay.
And that's where you sit still in a chair or whatever. You're looking out the window, you're looking at a wall. It doesn't matter. You're not thinking, you're not praying, you're not planning, you're not meditating. You're just sitting there getting bored with yourself. And it's just staggering the number of the brilliance of the insights that will come into your head in that 10 minutes, usually maybe towards the end. And it might even be later in the day, but it helps you just come right into the present, which is the only place you have any power, and let your higher self tell you something. Let God give you a message, whatever. Like, you have all kinds of wisdom in your head, and it might be just waiting for a chance to be heard over the noise of the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good way to start. But some people like to journal, and if your life just seems to be, you're always frazzled or you're always feeling emotionally down or whatever, then it might be a good time to stop and look at what's going on and ask yourself some questions like, what could I change that would make a big difference in my life? What's a small thing that I could change? And that's kind of a key. It needs to be a small thing, because if it's big, we're gonna rear back and say, like, there was probably something in your childhood that you were afraid of to ride the bike, or you didn't have the opportunity or something. And so you just keep backing off from it. What am I afraid of? That might be a good thing to start with.
Right.
Am I afraid to finish this up? Am I afraid nobody will help me out with it? Or, there's all kinds of things. But if you just sit quietly, you'll get some kind of an answer. Where's a good place to start?
Right.
And if you start with little small steps, then your amygdala, that's your fight or flight part of your brain, doesn't get alarmed. Like, what are they doing? They're getting me out of my comfort zone, but taking on this big project, and it's scary, and I just need to keep them safe. So let's stay right where we are. But if you make it a little tiny step, what's one small thing I could do in the next week to change the course of things just a little bit? That might be a way to start. But when it comes to decluttering, again, that question, how would I like to spend my time? How would I like to spend my life? That's a good way to see it. And I grew up, I knew how to sew. I learned how to sew, but I didn't really like making garments from scratch because they take a long time.
Yes.
And I don't have that kind of stick-to-itiveness, but I have it in different ways. But I have lots of clothes that don't quite fit anymore. So if I would just alter them a little bit, which doesn't take a lot of sewing.
Right.
But those things have been sitting on hold for years. And one of my favorite new books is called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals
Okay.
by Oliver Burkeman. He said, doing something that you love, that you enjoy. I'm also an artist, so I kind of missed working with the fabrics and the colors. So he said, it's like putting money in the savings account at the first part of your month instead of I'll put some in after everything
Right.
else is paid. You
Right.
never do it. It's the same with if you don't spend any time in your week at all doing even half an hour of the stuff that you love, you're never going to find time to do it. So you need to do that first, even if it's 10 minutes a day of sewing for me or whatever, or, reading something different, whatever people enjoy.
Right.
It might be hard to do that with skydiving, but you can. One of the things I said in my book is if you declutter, they estimate we spend close to an hour a day looking for stuff we can't find, or as I realized it, sometimes we think, oh, I should change the batteries in the smoke detectors.
Right.
But then I'd have to get the ladder, and the ladder's back in the garage and there's a bunch of stuff in front of it and I'd have to move all that. So then we stop and we do that over and over.
Right.
So
right.
I'm thinking maybe an hour is a little conservative.
So
that,
so one of the key part of the key then, well, first I want to go back. I love the self-talk. I think that's fabulous, right? We can have those positive sort of conversations to encourage ourselves and to motivate ourselves. But it sounds like the key is to try and check in as frequently as you can, to a way that it doesn't build up where it becomes an insurmountable thing down the road.
yeah. And
it's a good strategy.
We talked about these things we may not even realize that we're still afraid of. And I like to tell everybody about tapping, which is an energy healing technique that you can do by yourself.
Okay. There's
tons and tons of training online, but it's super easy and it applies to any situation. And the cool thing about it that I just thought of, since you mentioned giving ourselves positive self-talk, that doesn't always work. If our brain doesn't believe it, it's just going to reject it. So the thing about tapping, and it's a mind-body technique that's very physical. It's not in any way hoodoo voodoo or, paranormal or anything like that. It's very physical, because you're tapping on the meridians that they use for acupuncture. And that's a physical thing too. That's a point in your body that's placed. So you say, and you actually say the most negative things that you're thinking about the situation.
Right.
So even though I'm really scared to ride this bike, I know that I'm dealing with some fear and I accept how I feel. Right. And you say that 3 times while you're tapping on this part of your hand, and then you tap around your face and say, it just seems really scary. Why am I trying to do this now when I'm this age? I should have done this when I was 7. Okay. What's wrong with me? What was wrong with my parents? And you say all this negative stuff that you're actually thinking, and the tapping motion, it scrambles that message in your nervous system.
Okay.
So after you do that a few rounds, it's these 9 points around your head and your face and your upper body. And so you do that a few times for the negative side, and then you say, well, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. And it brings up endorphins. So it's like the pain-killing chemicals.
Gotcha. Yep.
So you're like, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. So that's what it does. And so then you start saying the positive things. Well, I'm just doing the best I can. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. I can learn to ride a bike now. I'm probably a lot more talented. Look at how quickly I was able to do it, and you say a few rounds of positive if you want to. You can even just stop with the negative, because that usually gets rid of at least one layer of whatever's holding you back.
Right.
And that's a super simple technique that applies to mental, emotional, all that kind of stuff. Physical pain. It's crazy how well it works.
It's interesting because it sounds like a very simple, easy thing that we could do, and there's not much involved with it too, right?
Right. Yeah. It's officially called emotional freedom technique, but the tappingsolution.com has tons of information, and there's hundreds of videos on YouTube about how to do it. So you can just spend a few minutes. And one of the things I realized recently is when when we wake up in a bad mood in the morning, we're kind of feeling antsy or uneasy or anxious, there's a pretty good chance that we had some stupid dream before we woke up. We don't remember the dream or the details of it, but we remember the feeling.
Right, right.
So if you do something like tapping, or if you just listen to some catchy music that cheers you up, or you read something funny, something that just changes your state right now, and the tapping does, in 5 or 10
Right.
minutes, you can be, oh, life is good. And so then you can save a ton of time trying to get into a day where you already feel like you're having a bad day before you even start.
Right.
And it's not logical, so you don't have to do anything logical with it. You
Just
just
go
have
with
to
it.
change how you feel.
That's it. That's it. And again, I think that's an important process to go through, right? In terms of literally changing how you feel. And we talked earlier about, having these items that we're emotionally attached to, and that creates a feeling inside of us, right? And so when you have
Right.
these feelings, they dictate and control where we go. And so to change that is just, it can be done. Obviously it can be done, but it's just not always easy, particularly those ones that are ingrained in us. It's been ingrained for such a long, long time.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the stuff in your house, you can say, even though I grew up in a house where holding on to everything was super important, and I don't really want to keep on with that idea, I still love and accept myself. That's one of the things that they say a lot, or I accept these feelings or whatever. And then you could say, I don't like how my house is, I don't like all this accumulation. What's wrong with me? This is crazy. I don't want all this stuff around, but yet I can't let go of it. And
Right.
there is, by the way, there is a physical change in your brain. It's when you let go of something that you are not quite sure you want to let go of, it feels like in your brain, like you have a small pain, like a minor burn or a paper cut.
Right.
It doesn't actually happen in your brain, but that's what it feels like. So that's part of why it's hard to let go of things. And
Yes.
so we have to kind of start small with something that we don't care a whole lot about.
Yes.
And then when you start feeling the rush of energy that comes, and I call it the feng shui energy, it's out there or whatever, and then it's in your body. So it's all a nice big circle, but the more you get some of that, then the easier it is to let go of things, because the feeling and the space that you clear up is worth so much more than whatever you could hold on to.
Right. Right. And again, those feelings, the attachment is what makes it so hard.
Mhm.
The process of decluttering, and again, there's different areas. We all have different areas of our lives. Is it necessary to sort of declutter one before you go to the other, or can you have multiple decluttering sessions going on at once?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why people are afraid to start, and sometimes that's me too, is we know if we can't get it done in one sitting, then there's going to be a bigger mess sitting out there than there is now. So there actually is no real right way to do that. I like to think about at least clearing out some of the deep storage, like the basement or garage, so that you have a place to put the things that you do use and love.
Right.
We all know Marie Kondo taught us to say, do you love it or do you use it? And if not, then it's clutter. So most of the stuff that we store in the deep storage, we just have put off deciding about it. And that's the hard part. But you can actually start anywhere. You could basically start in the area that bugs you the most. Like it's always nice to have the bedroom and the kitchen be somewhat organized and clutter-free if you can.
Yes.
Because the bedroom is where you want to relax and
Absolutely.
get to sleep and get your rest and everything. And then the kitchen, we got to live, we got to eat, we got to cook. So you don't want that full of a bunch of junk that doesn't have anything to do with those things. And that's all important to a family, and even to a single person. It's really nice to come home to a clean kitchen.
It is.
But some people don't care. That's fine too, So start with whatever.
I was going to say, Connie, I think a big thing in this is what I do or what you do or the next person does, it's going to be different for everyone. And so if we sort of get away from applying my judgments on how I think you should be decluttering your life or your
Exactly.
home, I think it's easier because, again, we're not all the same.
Right. Yep. Everybody's very unique. And it's when you put all those combinations together too, like one of the examples I gave in my book is if you go work out somewhere, and for me, it works better to go to a class at an athletic club or gym rather than just, I mean, I can do manual labor, but it doesn't calm me down or exhilarate me or whatever the same way as regular exercise. So, and then we come back and we're like, oh, I could tackle the junk drawer, because you feel more decluttered in your body, and that leads to more the desire to declutter the space around you. And if you really just want to spend your life doing adventures and you don't really want to spend a lot of time at home, then make it like an army barracks. Just get it as little to bother you with what you really want to do as you can with stuff at home. Oh, I can't go do this because I need to work on the junk room or whatever,
Connie, what made you write the book? And again, I got to tell you, your book here is, clear the space, feel the rush. What made you go and write this book?
Well, it was, as I mentioned earlier, when I looked at all the ones that I'd used before, I actually made myself stop buying new organizing books because almost all of them focus solely on the possessions. And I realized we see the possessions, so we think that's the problem, but it's probably more likely to be something emotional that's holding you back, or mind clutter or something like that. So I thought we should have a book that covered all three of the areas: the physical, the mental, and then the stuff. So that's why I decided to write it, because I always like to write something that's a little bit different than what everybody else is doing.
Sure.
And I figure there's already, most of my book is more focused towards decluttering. And I have some organizing tips in there, but I think there's hundreds of beautiful organizing books that already cover that. So I'm going to cover the other part.
Got you. Which is as important, or might even be more. I mean, depending on your perspective. So in the title, Clear the Space, Feel the Rush. What's the rush?
That's the exhilaration. That's the endorphins coursing through your body when you finally get in the groove of letting go of stuff and getting a big pile of things to take to the donation center, or maybe even throw away or recycle or whatever. I talked to a woman who was in her 70s a few years ago, and she said she and her husband needed to move out of their 2-story suburban house they'd lived in for 50 years. And she said their house sold in a week or two. They had 2 weeks to get out. And she said we had to get rid of, they were going to move to a 1,400 square foot townhouse. Wow. She said we had to get rid of 70% of our stuff to fit in to the new place. And she said it was the best feeling she'd ever had in her life.
Wow.
So yeah, the rush is that energy that starts coming through your body when you feel that lightness of the uncluttered space. It just gives more room for you. And a lot of people use the clutter in our lives to hold us back, to just kind of stay stuck where we are. And so I even recommend it for kind of getting yourself going. Like if you, and many people have, you can bring more nice things into your life by, Feng Shui says when you get done with the bookshelf or the closet, you always leave a quarter to a third of the space still open.
Right.
And then you don't necessarily fill it up with more things, but maybe more good things come in your life because of that energy swirling around.
I love it.
Or just the endorphins. It feels good.
I love it. Oh, I love it. That's amazing. And as you're describing it makes total sense, Connie. Like, I mean, if you clear out, you declutter and go through this process of letting things go and, cutting off the emotional attachment and being very practical and, do I use this or do I need it? I think if you kind of go through those processes, it does make things easier for you in the long run. So I think that's awesome. If you had a top sort of decluttering tip, what would you tell people?
Well, like I mentioned before, first declutter the guilt, and then second, focus on your dream. for how you'd like to spend your life. One of the things that this man that wrote the book 4,000 Weeks pointed out is if we live the average lifespan of about 80 years, that's 4,000 weeks. And a lot of us live as though we have 8,000 weeks or 16,000 weeks. We never get around to the stuff that really speaks to us as a person. So each person is individual, blah, blah, blah. So the thing is, let yourself off the hook. You've been busy, but maybe you want to spend the time that you have left doing stuff that's more fulfilling to you and your soul, your, whoever the unique person is that you are. So keep your eye on the prize.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that phrase.
Awesome.
And declutter the guilt.
Awesome. That's amazing, Connie. This has been so great, and I you really even caused me to think a little bit about sort of what I need to do in my own life, and how do I go about that process of cleaning up, and because I'm sure we all have things that we're just not aware of or oblivious to, that we need to pay attention to. So I thank you for helping us sort of frame that out a little bit. If listeners were interested in learning more about you, or catch up with you, or grab a copy of your book, where can we send them?
Well, it's you can go to my website, which is clearthespace.com. That's CLEARTHESPACE.com. And this is my book in case somebody hadn't seen it. But it's available online, and through the bookstores, they can order a copy to be print on demand. And it's now available in ebook, paperback, hardback, and audiobook. Just added audiobook, and my son bought it on iBooks, as well as you can get it on Amazon too. But it's wherever you want to find it. If you are willing to do a review, you can ask for a review copy through my website.
Okay. Oh, good.
And then I've been making a bunch of videos on TikTok, and I'll probably start putting those on Instagram too. Good. That's been really fun for me because I'm a frustrated artist. So now I'm getting a chance to make
it all out.
Yeah.
I love it.
I got an excuse.
Awesome. That's so awesome. That's amazing. Well, Connie, listen, congratulations on the book and all the work you're doing. I can see how hard you're working, and it's so amazing. And I hope you're satisfied with what you're doing, because it's fabulous, and your efforts. And so thank you for what you've done. Thank you for being here and sharing, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Audley. I appreciate it.
Take care. And back we are here on the podcast, and much thanks and appreciation goes out to Connie for being here and helping us understand how much more freedom we can experience in our lives if we dedicated time to regularly going through the decluttering process and not just wait for the spring. Also, do remember her book, Clear the Space, Feel the Rush, is available at her website. I'd encourage you to head on over and pick yourself up a copy. I truly appreciated so much of what Connie had to share, and if I were to reflect on what we talked about and take away one thing from our chat, it would have to be this. Decluttering has become a popular trend in recent years, and for good reason. It not only helps free up our space in our home, but also can have a powerful effect on our mental well-being. In fact, clearing out the clutter in our personal space can have benefits that extend far beyond a tidier living environment. Here are just 3 ways decluttering can improve your overall well-being. Living in a decluttered space can also contribute to feelings of overwhelm and anxiety, plus a general sense of unease. By decluttering your personal space, you'll create a much more calming and peaceful environment that can promote relaxation and reduce stress levels. When our personal space is cluttered, it can be challenging to focus on the task at hand. A cluttered environment can also make it more difficult to stay organized. By decluttering, you'll create a far more efficient workspace that can boost productivity and focus. When we're surrounded by clutter, our minds just feel just as cluttered. A tidy and organized environment, on the other hand, can help improve mental clarity and allow for greater creativity. And then lastly, living in a cluttered environment can take a toll on our mood and self-esteem. By decluttering, we're sending a message to ourselves that we care about our surroundings and our overall well-being. Seeing a tidy space can help boost our mood and self-confidence, contributing to an overall sense of positive well-being. In conclusion, decluttering can have a profound impact on our well-being, like I've talked about. By creating a tidy and organized and peaceful environment, we can reduce stress levels, boost productivity and focus, enhance creativity, improve mood, and our self-esteem. So take some time this week to start your own decluttering process in your personal space and see how it can positively impact your life. We've come to the end of another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I send my thanks and appreciation to our amazing listeners and all those lovers of audaciousness that continue to support this podcast week after week after week. I send my thanks and appreciation directly to you. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.